For the first time in weeks, there are some signs that the oxygen situation in the national capital is a little bit more stable. It certainly has been in the last 24 hours, and one can only hope that going forward that remains the case, given the fact that oxygen consumption at hospitals has gone up dramatically because of the second surge in COVID. The Delhi Chief Minister has said that if he continues to get 700 tons of oxygen daily, and that has been the case in the last 24 hours, then this crisis as far as oxygen availability will be resolved.
जैसा मैंने बताया, दिल्ली को 700 टन ऑक्सीजन की ज़रूरत है। कल पहली बार केंद्र सरकार ने 730 टन ऑक्सीजन भेजी है। अगर 700 टन ऑक्सीजन डेली आ जाती है, दिल्ली के अंदर हम इतने सारे ऑक्सीजन के बेड्स क्रिएट कर देंगे। ढेरों बेड्स क्रिएट करने का हमने प्लान बनाया हुआ है। 9-9.5 हजार बेड हम तुरंत तैयार कर सकते हैं अगर ऑक्सीजन समुचित मिल जाए हम लोगों को। अगर 700 टन ऑक्सीजन डेली आने लग गई, मैं आपको यकीन दिलाता हूं, दिल्ली में किसी भी व्यक्ति की ऑक्सीजन की कमी की वजह से मौत नहीं होने देंगे।
Well, hearing the Supreme Court on the Delhi oxygen crisis, that's now come to an end, the hearing in the court. Orders will come subsequently. The Supreme Court has said that it's important to ensure that there is no oxygen panic in Delhi. The centre told the Supreme Court the need for Delhi is not because of less supply of oxygen, but serious systemic failures in distribution. There must be an audit because of its systemic failure, but they aren't targeting the political leadership or officers. Delhi, for its part, told the Supreme Court the centre's assurance to the court that 700 metric tons will be supplied every day is as per the court order, and that has not been met. If nothing is to hide, let it come before the nation. How allocation and distribution is done is what the Delhi government actually had to say. Well, joining us now, the MLA and spokesperson of the Aam Aadmi Party, Raghav Chadha. Raghav, thank you very much for being with us. So yesterday was a good day. I would say 24 hours, you got 730 tons of oxygen. Are you confident going forward, based on what's been happening in the court and based on what you're seeing on the ground, that this will continue?
Well, first of all, I do like to thank both the Honorable Supreme Court and the Honorable High Court for their interventions. And it is only subsequent to their interventions that our prayers were finally heard by the union government. And yesterday, we got 730 metric ton of oxygen. Now, there are two quick points that I wish to highlight when I talk of 730 metric ton. First of all, the demand in Delhi is 976 metric ton and not 700. We want to ramp up our capacity. The number of ICU beds need to increase. We have not even accounted for the COVID care centers, oxygen consumption, etc., in the 700 figure, etc. So therefore, the most accurate figure is 976. Against 976, we have got 730 metric ton, which is 75% of our overall demand, which is good, and we welcome that. Secondly, out of the 730 metric ton that we received yesterday, Vishnu, 250 metric ton of oxygen has come from undefined, undeclared sources that essentially mean that it's an ad hoc arrangement. This does not have a permanent nature. And in fact, in the Supreme Court, the affidavit filed by the central government also talks about how 700 cannot be supplied on a recurring basis. They go on to say that we can supply 700 metric ton on one occasion in a week or maybe twice, but we can't do it for all 7 days in a week. So therefore, the arguments were of course placed before the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court in its wisdom will very shortly pass an order. And we do hope that the supply of 700 continues. If supply of 700 continues, it is good to sustain the current medical infrastructure. But if we need to ramp up our capacity, if we need to add more ICU beds, more oxygen beds, more COVID care centers, more oxygen refiller stations, etc., then this figure needs to go up.
So, Raghav, in the last 48 hours or so, a lot of the foreign aid which has come, oxygen plants have been set up, one at AIIMS, one at RML, one at Max, one in an East Delhi hospital, and I believe one in Apollo. These are large hospitals. But a few of these hospitals have also been in trouble for oxygen. Does this help?
Of course, all these efforts help. And the government of Delhi has also placed orders, and we are importing from France PSA plants, oxygen plants to install in several government-run medical facilities and medical establishments. That is certainly going to supplement the efforts of the government of Delhi. However, what I feel is that these PSA plants of a limited size and capacity can only produce that much metric ton of oxygen. As far as I understand, there are big hospitals that require a liquid medical oxygen unless they have huge PSA plants producing 30, 40 or 50 metric ton of oxygen, which I'm afraid does not currently happen in Delhi or in any part of India for that matter. And I think all of us with the second wave has hit us, all of us are wiser now. And I think it will be the endeavor of my government. It is the endeavor of private sector hospitals to now have in-house oxygen generation capacities like PSA plants so that we never see, what we saw over the last few days and weeks.
So, Raghav, just so that I understand it, what percentage of the requirement of Delhi's hospitals, or even if you focus on a few hospitals, would these oxygen generating plants now deliver? For example, a large hospital, the plants acquired from Germany or from France, what percentage of the requirement presently do they?
Look, first of all, I don't have the ready figure of what is the overall capacity or what is the oxygen production of all these put together. Some of them are being imported, some of them have been imported and being installed, and some of them have been installed in some facilities.
Right.
So in order to do the math, one would require figures. I'm pretty sure the government will have it. I don't have it readily available in front of me. But what I can certainly say is that let's take the example of Gangaram Hospital, which is an hospital in my constituency. Now, Gangaram Hospital in pre-COVID times required about 8 to 10 metric ton of oxygen. However, in COVID times, that is in the second wave, when the demand for oxygen and the number of patients who are on high flow oxygen has gone up, the demand has gone up from 10 metric ton per day to almost 25, 28, 30 metric tons per day. So the demand has increased. Now, in order to service this demand of 30 metric ton oxygen, they have contracts with companies like INOC, Air Linde, Air Liquide, etc., which bring this liquid medical oxygen in cryogenic tanks and place it in their cryogenic tanks installed at the facility. So in order to not use the LMO and create an in-house facility, Gangaram Hospital, for example, will have to set up a huge PSA plant that could generate on a daily basis 30, 32, 35, in fact 40 if they were to plan for the surplus metric ton of oxygen, which I'm sure that going ahead every hospital in the city will do.
Point taken that these are initial steps, and you would still need to bring in a large amount of liquid oxygen even going forward. Now, one of the things which you have done, Raghav, is you've started this oxygen bulletin. Could you tell us a little bit about that, what the goal over there is?
So every day, every afternoon, I, on behalf of the government, issue an oxygen bulletin. I think there is a lot of curiosity among the people as to how much oxygen is actually required, how much are we getting, where is the gap, why isn't the gap being fulfilled, and what happens to these SOS calls? Who is catering to these hospitals when they call frantically and say that we are running out of gas, we're running out of oxygen? In order to put very transparently the entire facts and figures before the government, we've started issuing this oxygen bulletin. We essentially say three things in that bulletin. Number one, the demand and the supply on that very day. What is the demand supply gap? So today we got 75% of our demand. So there is only a 25% gap in the supply of oxygen. Second, we do a weekly average as to what has been the weekly average demand and what has been the average supplies and the average gap between demand and supply. And the third thing that we do, which is most significant, is how many SOS calls did we receive, did our oxygen war room receive, which I'm also part of it, so I'm closely involved with the process. How many SOS calls did we receive in the last 24 hours? So I will give you a sense of how these SOS calls are being addressed. These SOS calls, when we receive a call from the hospital saying that we're about to run out of oxygen, we divert some existing supplies or use our reserves, the SOS reserves that we've set up at 2 locations in Delhi, Mayapuri and Rajghat. We rush cylinders and our LMO vehicles to that particular hospital and refill their reserves. In some cases, we also, ensure that the supplier of that particular hospital comes on board and the supply chain between the hospital and the supplier reestablishes, so that in future, the government need not have to, cater to these SOS situations. in the last 3-4 days, one had seen that the number of SOS calls that we were getting were close to 50, 45, on a good day 40. But today the number has come down drastically. Now this shows that the more the amount of supply in oxygen, lesser the number of SOS calls. So the relationship between the number of SOS calls and the amount of oxygen supplied is absolutely inversely proportional.
Right.
And therefore now, today, we have about, I think, 16 or 18 SOS calls. That's it, in comparison to 60 SOS calls that we were receiving a couple of days ago. So situation is improving. We are very positive, we are hopeful, and we do hope that this 700 plus metric ton supply of oxygen has some permanence in its nature.
Right.
This should not be a one-time ad hoc arrangement.
All right, Raghav, I think we all hope that that is the case, that Delhi gets the oxygen that it needs, particularly since people are also talking about a third surge. One hopes that that never happens, but we need to be ready. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you for having me over.